Thank you very much for joining me on the Voice of Job Seekers Live. Thank you very much. You know about the podcast. You probably don't know that I have a video channel as well. So if you want to check me out on YouTube, just look for my name and I'll appear somewhere on your browser. Glad that you're able to join us on this Tuesday afternoon as we're taking a little bit of different approach to bringing you career and job search value as you look towards your future and maybe your children's future. You might want to consider how and where you pick your education um, because public education isn't for everybody, right? So today I invited my friend, Dr. Antonio Boyd. He is the Executive Vice President of Future School. He is a great guy. He's also worked with Hope Worldwide and as a Vice President in the region, and also has a great background in ministry as well and in education as a college professor. Welcome to the show, Antonio. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Mark. It's always good to see you and be in your presence. And you're such a altruistic individual and just out here spreading happiness around the world. And so, I'm just going to have a good time with a old friend who I just love you, your wife, and your family. So good to be with you, brother.
Yes, and much love to the other Dr. Boyd as well.
Yes, yes,
He,
yes.
he is a physician, and I know that you're going through some things in your life, and you always handle it with such grace and poise. If I didn't know you personally, like I have for the past 35 years, maybe, has it been about
Yes.
35, right? So yes, since I already know that story, I know the different chapters in your life and your story. You always appear graceful, poised, never out of whack. Always respond with a mindset to up above first, and then to others second. So grateful, and this particular role fits you perfectly. I mean, being having a major influence in the future of school. For people who haven't heard about that and heard the little rumblings, it's not quite an earthquake yet, but it's sure to be. Describe what the future of school is.
So Future School is a nonprofit, what we call education intermediary organization, which means that education intermediaries work between an issue and the system, right? And they
Mm-hmm,
work to solve problems. And so
mm-hmm,
the organization started as the foundation of online and blended learning for online and blended learning about 6 years ago. And the goal of the organization was you have all these ed tech companies that are on the periphery of the education system, where Google, Microsoft, Apple, Pearson, there's hundreds of them, Stride,
mm-hmm,
and they weren't working together basically with the different products to make the system more fluid. So the foundation for online and blended learning was created to try to move that needle forward through offering grants to innovative teachers, offering scholarships to students who maybe use online and blended, like your son. Let's say he in his nursing program at John Hopkins, maybe he could go to class for his clinicals, but maybe he
mm-hmm,
had to work so he could take his biology class online. Well, we would
mm-hmm,
support a kid like that who says, I have this issue, right? I can't go to school all the time in person. And so I've created this space for myself to do both. And we would try to support them. We also did a lot of research around the effectiveness of online and blended learning even before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit. Well, right before the pandemic, the board of directors decided to change the organization from a foundation to a nonprofit because they felt like it could be a catalyst for change versus just supporting change. We could push the system. And so then Future School was launched, and we just got the official name change with the IRS done, I think, last week. So we're excited. And we've been working sort of like in between ed tech and 200 districts across the country on
mm-hmm,
COVID-19. So the timing of our transition couldn't be better. And we talk about going from crisis schooling, which is what we experienced in the last, you know, 12, 15 months, to
Hmm.
actually remote education. And even now, we're going back to crisis schooling again, right? Everybody's
Hmm.
deciding whether they want to wear a mask or they don't. Do they want to be virtual or do they want to be in class? I have parents emailing me. I went to class the first day, and now my whole kindergarten class is quarantined because little Johnny got the virus. So we're in a
Hmm.
crisis schooling mode, and Future School is going to be an organization that comes between that.
Yeah, so really you're filling in the gap between, people dilemmas between their physical and what's going on, and also meeting the need where you're the destination virtually where people can go to first and find solutions for their educational dilemmas.
Yes, and one of the other things that we can do is when the pandemic happened, you remember, Mark, school districts got all kinds of money for PPE, right? Because we thought we were going to be in school and we are going to have to set up little shelters for kids and wear the mask. And then the
Mhm.
pandemic was worse than what we thought. And so schools went virtual. But superintendents, they weren't ready for virtual learning. So they had all kinds of ed tech companies come in and say, hey, I have the best wingback widget in virtual learning, and for $5 million and a 3-year contract, I can sell it to you, and you'll be good to go.
Mhm.
And these, some of the superintendents described that as snake oil salesmen because they were just trying to sell them technology to get
Sure.
money, and so they wanted an organization who could vet those ed tech companies and bring to them the brightest and best companies. And so one of the roles we played in the pandemic was we said, okay, what areas do you need help? And then we went out and looked at the best companies in those areas. And then we would go to superintendents and say, here's the top 7 guys and here's why, right?
Mhm.
Which
Right.
then created an environment where they didn't have to spend 7 or 8 months studying a company before they did deal with them. They would just say, well, Future School says they vetted them and they brought them to the table. So now we can put it in play, which helped superintendents act faster, right? Because we needed to
Mhm.
act fast, right?
Right, right. Well, how are people finding you, or what has been maybe the way? Are people finding you through the internet, or people you finding you on LinkedIn specifically, or how are people finding you and finding that you offer a lot of the solutions that people are looking for?
Well, giving out grants to teachers and to students and doing research for 5 years, we had a cadre of over 200 districts we were already working with. So we already
Mm,
had a population of districts. Then we partnered with the association, the American Association of Superintendents, and that's another 13,000 superintendents. We
mm-hmm,
work with the Successful Practice Network, which is also one of the most respected research companies in the country. But the other thing that happened was we spent a lot of time. Well, I don't, but our CEO, Amy Valentine, we call her CEO evangelist. She spends a lot of time doing what you're doing. She does podcasts,
mm-hmm,
webinars. She's a thought leader in the space. And so a lot of people learn about us through we just got named one of the top 100 podcasts in the education field. So
mm-hmm.
a lot of people learn about us through our podcasts and webinars, and it's growing every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of people are also watching as well, and they're glad to hear that you've been able to spearhead the pivot a lot of districts have been able to make in education, and especially one thing I think is I guess this might be a little bit outside of the box and realm of what I talk about on a regular basis, which is basically job search and careers. But I think it's kind of relevant to how people really need to see their pivot in their careers as institutions kind of have to pivot as well. And they kind of set the standard or kind of set the way for the way that people are going to view their career. In other words, if their school, if their educational base is pivoting in the pandemic or it's pivoted throughout times of these different historical times, because of course you guys have been not just through the pivot, but through the civil rights movement or the new civil rights movement from last year, and also the all the other things that are happening. Um, are people really, in your view, maybe you could talk from the teacher's point of view or maybe from the student's point of view, what are some things they're beginning to learn about their future as the way they look is they're thinking about how they're building their future. And maybe there's some things that you're intentionally teaching that are going to help people with their future.
Right. Well, in your space, I compliment you for being in the space you're in for two reasons. Number one, college and career pathways are what everybody's talking about in education. We now have states who are basically setting standards for what they call college readiness standards, and they have documents that they've developed across the country that says this is what you must have to be a world-class educated high schooler going to college. And so, with
Mm-hmm.
that said, your conversation is poignant. And then for students of color, your conversation is absolutely poignant because there's an equity gap between what our white and affluent students do in regards to being ready for college and career, and our minority students. So the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're around talking about this is a key issue. With that said, the pandemic hit the students hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Studies were showing that students who were going to go to college decided, when my college experience is going to be online and blended, I'm probably not going to go. So we saw a
Mm-hmm.
large decrease in applications for students to go to college because they said, I don't want to go to an online environment. Even folk who are in college, several of them, had to do, you might be at Florida A&M and you wanted to have that experience, but you couldn't come on campus. And so that was a big hit in the area. And but on the other hand, on the flip side of that, companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, they're offering certification programs. This is another competing interest where they're saying you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to go to college because we can't find the workforce to fill all the jobs we have. So what we'll do is put you in a accelerated certification program in our product directly, and then graduate you at $50,000 a year. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
dichotomy between pandemic fatigue and the opportunity now where companies are just going around the system, right? They're saying, I'm just going to go straight into high school and find our candidates and get them ready to come to my company. I don't even know if the value of a 4-year education is that important when we're talking about working on a single system. So
Mm-hmm.
and then teachers have to recognize, going to your other point, that because of that, the shift in how we do education has to be all about not just training little Johnny on the humanities and little Johnny on history, but what are we doing to prepare little Johnny to get a job? Okay. And so
Mm-hmm.
you see a lot of CTE programs, you see a lot of uh, experiential learning programs, you see a lot of internships. And in my research, in my doctoral program, I used to convene panels of corporate leaders in the human resource and also in the talent acquisition areas in big companies like Wells Fargo, Microsoft, and they
Mm-hmm.
all say that they give this analogy, Mark. We're like AAU basketball coaches now. We're going down into the high schools and we're recruiting freshmen and we're getting them internships in our company so that by the time they're seniors, they're ready to come on board with us. We can no longer wait until they're juniors and seniors in college to go to a college fair talking about, hey, come to my company, because by then, 7 companies have wooed them and are trying to bring them into their company, especially minority students. So you're even seeing a change in the dynamics of how our young people are being recruited to come to major companies now, which is pretty
Mm-hmm.
exciting.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I think it's a great idea too. That the career preparedness starts a whole lot earlier than 12th grade. It starts a whole lot earlier than really most people don't expect to really think about that until their senior year in college, traditionally, because that's
Right.
when you're supposed to get your internship. Now, I think it does get down to maybe sixth to ninth grade to where
Exactly.
you'll start teaching. I mean, outside of career fairs. I mean, career fairs are wonderful, but they don't give the actionable and practical to finding a great career. They make them aware. I think it's great stimulation, but I don't think it's career education in that respect. So, I think that's great that you get down into the trenches of the of high school and start to teach it in. Now, I think there's a number of other career thought leaders that think like I do, that yeah, freshman year is that time because that's when they start to do summer school. Now, summer school for a lot of people is just a you know activity to keep them busy. When really it is a great chance to shape their thinking into the future.
Yeah, and one of my initial research sites was a high school in South Carolina called the High School for Health Professions, and I think this will really resonate with you, Mark, because of your great work. So this school is a public charter school, and
Hmm.
Orangeburg, South Carolina, and South Carolina in general, we have what we call a minority medical shortage, meaning that we have a lot of 60% of the population is African Americans, but we don't have a lot of Black and brown doctors, right? And so this school was created to build a pipeline of Black and brown doctors. Now get this, the students that graduate from the middle school in that district are reading at the 30% math level and 24% reading level. So they're in a deficit. They come to
Hmm.
this school, and in the last 5 years, 100% have graduated and gone on to college. But what this school does is the first day you come to school, they say, what do you want to be? A phlebotomist, a doctor, a dentist, all the medical professions. They put a short white coat on you. You sit down with a counselor and they say, okay, Mark, you had a deficit in reading and math. Doctors make $120,000 a year. If you
Hmm.
would come to these classes to up your reading and math, we guarantee by the time you graduate from here, not only will you be going to college in a pre-med major, but 4 years later, you'll be in medical school at the Medical University of South Carolina. And going back to my AAU analogy, for our kids, it's all economics, right? We want to have our car, we want to have our money. And so when
Hmm.
you explain to a young person the actual financial outcomes of your investment in school, school is a lot different. It's not just I'm going to, 8 periods a day, sitting for a half hour in a line of desk and I got lunch and PE. No, what I'm doing is training for a $120,000 a year job. And so therefore you see these kids overcome all kinds of academic outcomes. And like I said, they now have a pipeline where they're just sending doctors to the Greenville Medical System, MUSC, and it's a phenomenal model. And I think what we were trying to do with that is replicate that because there's one of those same type schools in Houston. They're doing the same thing. They actually have that high school right on the Baptist Medical Center campus. So those
Right.
kids go right from class into clinicals with actual doctors. And it's just turning out a lot of young people.
Yeah, and having that pipeline, I think, is very important because we know that that black and people of color didn't have access to pipelines like that in the past. That those pipelines existed. Maybe they weren't called pipelines, but that actually that's what it was because the likelihood of being accepted and furthering your career because their lives has been shaped that way as opposed to people of color and black people has just been in survival mode and that's a big difference and it's a big difference in mindset and that's good that you're changing that game because if you have a campus that's on a hospital, what else are you going to be influenced by, right? And let's say you don't want to be a doctor, be a nurse, it's not that bad either.
Exactly. Exactly. And when we put before them, the kind of money they can make, being a chemist, being in a lab tech, 50% of the students at that high school, they go to 2-year college to become phlebotomists before they even graduate high school. And we did a study, and they become the number one breadwinners in their in their household. So my mom was working at one of the kids' mom working at the church's fried chicken, and she's kind of just barely making it. Well, her kid goes to that school. He becomes a phlebotomist. He makes $25 an hour at the hospital. Now he's making more than his mama. And then when he graduates, he goes to nursing school. So these
Right.
kids see early in their life the value of education in a different way, and it makes them more successful.
And you meet them where they are as far as their lives. You're not trying to hype them up because some won't have a college. Not everybody belongs in college, and
Exactly.
Lord knows, colleges are going to go through, along with this pandemic, a day of reckoning, so to speak, because of there's the same model that has been used for many years, and you get something that is uh, what the pandemic has brought on. There are going to be changes, and there's going to be the change in the ways that you think. And yet, even with that model as well, is that there's still a major shortage of doctors, and there's still a major shortage of nurses. So, this is going to go on for some years, and it's not just going to be a temporary filling.
Yeah. And in the context of African Americans and folk of color, one of the things one of my colleagues told me, I'm going to do a shameless plug for Northeastern, but he
Mm-hmm.
was telling me, he said, Antonio, do you realize that you're going to be a part of the 2%? And I said, the 2%, what is that? He said, in all of the United States, whether it be historically Black colleges or public PWIs, there's only 2% of African American males that get their doctorates this year, and only 9% of African Americans overall, male or female. So out of 100% of the folks that graduate, only 9% of us will be folk of color. And so, in every area of society, that's why your work is important. There's pipelines that need to be built where more and more of us, when we see our historically Black colleges and we see all these prominent African Americans, we think we're graduating a ton of folk. We're not compared to our counterparts. So we got a lot of work to do um, in all areas of careers to make sure we continue to strive to move forward.
Yeah. And, starting early, um, starting in an environment where you're going to be influenced by what you see and what you hear, and also just with the plan to streamline uh, young people into different careers and have different career choices. Is there anything else that we need to know, we need to look for as far as the reshaping of the student, and to help them with career intelligence and create a more a more profitable career mindset, if you will, for the future?
Yeah, so we're working with, going back to my acknowledgement of ed tech companies, we're working with a company called Career Navigator. Career
Hmm.
Navigator was created by a professor, Anthony DePass, who's a genius. And Career Navigator, what we're doing is it's being implemented in the colleges and historically Black colleges, but also now Future School is trying to take it into K-12. And what Career Navigator does, it allows you to get online because our young people are very savvy in social media. And it allows you to say, my name is Mark Dyson, and I want to make $100,000 a year. I want to live in the suburbs of Chicago in a 3-bedroom house. I want to have a dog. I want to have 2 cars in my garage, preferably a Mercedes and a Lexus.
Hmm.
And I want to retire with 200,000 in the bank. And you put that
Hmm.
in the algorithm and it spits out, here's the 20 careers that you could do that will put you in that position. Here's what it takes to get those jobs, get to that career. Here's what it takes college wise. Here's what it takes training wise, your choice. And this program is being implemented in guidance counselors' offices in, like I said, right now in colleges, but we're trying to take the model to high school because information is power. If Mark Dyson knows, I mean, he's got his whole life planned out. He wants to have 2 kids, 2 cars, a dog, and a house. And he knows what it's going to take to get there before he starts. It so helps him avoid the pitfall of going to college and majoring in German when German is not going to get you what you said. So he'll see his career and it'll be these 10 careers. And then whatever he decides, okay, well, engineering will get me there. I do like math, so I'll go that route. Because what we see is, in my research, the data shows that the average college student goes 6 years because the first 2 years they're just trying to figure out what they want to major in.
Yeah.
Well, what happens? Then they accrue $100,000 in debt. And there's a recent study in the New York Times to say the system has failed Black and Brown students because most Black and Brown students in their 30s have so much debt that they can't even buy a house.
Yeah. Yeah, and those challenges just continue to pile on. They're going to have to choose their futures.
Exactly.
A lot of them don't get that because they've been taught one way. And
Exactly.
I think your program and your intentions is to give them many different choices, including what kind of lifestyle they want to live. But I think it also, too, I think there's more chance for them to be happy, and because they have a choice instead of uh, only relying on what their parents have taught them. Because parents, they were in survival mode if you were black and people of color, more than likely. I'm glad that my children didn't have to have that kind of dilemma where they only had to choose between survival or go out and make it only on your own just to have debt. But I think ultimately people are understanding that there's a whole much bigger world with a whole lot more choices out there. But the idea is to get them to learn that early on.
Yeah, and I think also what it does, Mark, to be honest, is it saves us as parents a lot of time of, with our arms around their necks, right? Because, we're steering and directing, and baby, if you get that education, if you go to college, you're going to make some money, and we're pushing and pride and spending all this money on trying to get them to do the right thing. But if they see it for themselves, when my son um, first he's a musician, so he got a scholarship to Berkeley, and Berkeley costs $30,000 a year.
Right.
And we said to him, well, we don't know if we want to send you there because the freshman class is 4,000, but by the time they're sophomores, so many of them go into the music field, it's only 1,000 sophomores. And we think you might be one of those who say, well, I don't have to go to college to be Michael Jackson. I'm just going to drop out and go play. And so
Right.
we ended up sending them to UIC and then DePaul Conservatory. But it wasn't until he realized what it was going to take to get through college that he got through. It wasn't
Mhm.
all the prodding and me being a doctor, his mother being a doctor, that example and pushing him and showing him all our degrees. None of that worked. It was when he decided, here's what I can make if I go do this. And
Mhm.
then he went on through it and paid for it. So
Yeah.
that's what happens.
Yeah, and as well, really, most kids are at this particular point, and I wrote an article about it recently, that people gonna have to ignore their parents' advice because they haven't been through anything like this before, and they're not exposed to all the tools that are out there to help them thrive. So it's not just the fact that you're getting bad advice, but you've got to go somewhere now to get the good advice and get the good tools and engage educational institutions like the Future School. So there you go. Did you have anything else to add before we sign off? And I don't know if there are people watching, but if you do have questions, feel free to ask Dr. Boyd at this particular time before we head out.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is one of the things about my experience at Northeastern is Northeastern University is the number one experiential learning school in the country. Well, what does
Mhm.
that mean? We believe wholeheartedly that the best way students learn is through experience. We don't think the classroom is where it happens. We believe you got to expose kids to experiences that then allow them to decide what they want to do. And I use my son as an example again. When he was coming in his freshman year, the first thing I did was took him up to the practice of the local high school band and just told him to watch. And then
Mhm.
once he saw what they were doing, he was like, "That's what I want to do." And I was telling him yesterday, I said, "Well, found one of your old drum pads where you were just beating and beating that thing, and we couldn't get no sleep behind all the beating you've done, and now you've toured the world being a jazz musician. Well, how did you make that connection?" And he says, well, when you took me up there to see it, when I saw it, I knew I could be it. And so I would just say, let's push experiential learning, making sure that our students, because we learn the best as people of color through experience, right? Whether it be our experience of the Middle Passage, our experiences in, going through all the Jim Crow and all the things we've gone through, and even our recent experiences with George Floyd and all the, things that we've been challenged by. Those experiences shape us. And so I would just say, let's promote that and be more experiential as people of color.
Yes, absolutely. And I've had a mentor actually said that if you want your kids to be smarter, take them somewhere else. Take
Exactly.
them other and he left it at that. But I've filled in the blank since then. Is that you take them to see many things in many different places and watch them start to rethink about their lives and their goals and how they want to shape in the future. Dr. Boyd, thank you so much for joining me here on the Voice of Job Seekers Live. I surely appreciate you coming and spending the time. Your time is precious, and you've got a lot of things going on. I definitely don't want to keep you too much longer.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure, and continue to be successful. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for joining me here. And for the rest of you, thank you very much for joining me here on the live edition. And come back tomorrow. I've got three other guests, so I'm not through yet, and try to help you guys with your job search and careers. And of course, the regular show, Job Seeker Nation, will appear at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central regularly, and then the other show will start at 2 o'clock. So, got a lot of things going on. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.